Thank you very much. And I'm very glad we get to be here today and talk a little bit more about some of the things that we're doing at the University of Florida and some of the things that I've been working on for the last several years and thinking about in terms of where we're going with the future of higher education. So right now, I think it's not a surprise to us to think about the status of higher education and those concerns about science education around the world, in the United States in particular, but other places as well. Our students tend to be afraid of science. They think it's too hard. They're not interested in the agricultural sciences anymore, and so we have a real concern about that. At the same time, a lot of the kinds of jobs and the technologies that are necessary require more education. And so we need our students to be interested in science. And this is driven by a lot of the changes in information and technology that are out there. What we've been working on and thinking about, and when we think about how education needs to change, it's worth looking at the history a little bit. And the current system of higher education, we talked about the land grant, I mentioned it yesterday, the UFL land grant system. It was designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore. It was created when the world was moving into the industrial era, in the United States especially. We're moving into the industrial age. And so next slide, we created a factory model in our minds about how to educate students so that we would put them through their grades and they would all learn the same things and it would all be highly standardized and they would all come out the other side able to do the same kinds of things just like you would do in a factory. And so our students, the thinking was that they should be standardized, and this is, go ahead, not really relevant anymore because we're not in the industrial age anymore. We live in a very highly complex, rapidly accelerating world. The increase in information and knowledge that we talked about yesterday is tremendous. I love this sample fact that a week's worth of the New York Times contains more information than a person was likely to come across in their entire lifetime in the 18th century. And that 4 exabytes of unique information will be generated this year, which is more than in the previous 5,000 years. So this puts the amount of information and knowledge out there in a context that I think is different than when we just think about going on a computer and how much knowledge is out there. This is what we're trying to convey to our students. And I keep talking about it's like trying to drink from a fire hose for these students. There is so much information. We need to really think, how does this go? Next slide. How does this change what we need to do for learning and for education? We can't give them all the information in the world anymore. It's not possible. So we have to do something different. So this means we need to revisit the role that we have as teachers and as professors in the classroom and in higher education. And it also means that we need to explore different ways of educating our students that use modern technology and engage the millennial generation that grew up with the internet. Whether they have full access to it or whether they have a phone, they know that it's there. And that's very different than when I was born and when any of the rest of us were born. So first of all, the role of the professor in education is changing, whether we want it to or not. It's just a fact. It used to be that we were the experts, that we were the only ones that knew what we knew, and we had to transmit that information out to people and to students. That's not true anymore. So this cartoon just has a little boy raising his hand in class and saying, "Excuse me, Mrs. Warren, Google begs to differ," which I just think is, and I've had that happen in my classrooms as well, where I say something and the student has already looked it up online and said, "No, you're wrong." And we have to deal with that as a fact. Go ahead. So the idea then, and I've done different searches. I did some searches on pictures of professors in India, and I did some searches on pictures of professors all around the world, and they all tend to look with different colors something like this. And in the past, we were, with the tie and the glasses and looking very, very smart and sometimes very stern, and we were the gatekeeper of knowledge and the experts. But now, with Google, of course, I Googled the word Google because I was curious. And it gets almost 4 billion hits in 0.09 seconds. So that's just a lot of information. Go ahead. Then I said, okay, well, what would happen if I Googled my own soil carbon field where I do research? And I got 2.4 million results in a half second. And now I don't know that much about soil carbon. And most of these sites, I had no idea that they existed. So for me, this was news, and my students obviously in the classroom have access to this on their phones. So who is the expert now? Who is the gatekeeper of knowledge? I have to rethink my role when I'm in my classroom with my students, because I don't know all of these things. So I can't compete with Google. Most of us can't compete with Google, although maybe there are some very special individuals out there that come close, but that's a different story. So what do we do? We have to rethink the role. I just love the title of this book, Teaching with Your Mouth Shut. And I think it's appropriate when we think about using technology, because we're not necessarily talking when we're using technology. And also, this is not an online course with technology, but this is education technology. This is an example of a modern classroom called a scale-up classroom, where the students are sitting around tables, each with a laptop, and any one of those student laptops can be projected on the screen around the room. And this is a very different way of thinking about an education environment compared to a typical classroom with auditorium-style seating. And so the challenge, of course, is like that. Where's Waldo? I don't know if anybody ever played with that game of the little person hidden in a big picture full of people, but there's a teacher here somewhere, and I think it's this person who's standing up in the center. But that's what is an example of how different this is that you don't necessarily automatically know who is the teacher when you walk into a classroom like this. So we have to reframe what our job is in the classroom. I am still a subject matter expert, but I'm not the only provider of knowledge to my students anymore. I am, however, because I have a PhD, I am an expert learner. That's what it means to get a PhD. So I can help the students in some way, and I'm still necessary, but not because of the facts that I know, as much as because of the way that I can help teach students. Another way of thinking about it is similar to what we do in extension as well, as thinking about moving from pushing information out to the students and transmitting our knowledge to letting them pull the information, letting them construct their own knowledge based on trying to solve problems or deal with challenges. And so this is a graphic that I like, where it's talking about the students pulling knowledge, thinking entrepreneurially. Or the final way that I've been thinking about it is thinking about flipping the pyramid. And people talk about active learning. They don't all have smartphones, but phones are very common, and so they want their learning to go with them. They want to be able to listen to it while they're doing something else, or check in online on their phone. And then the last thing, which we didn't hear about with extension, but is really something going on with colleges and younger students, is their learning is what they call gamified. And that doesn't mean you learn with games. It means that you use the elements of games that make them fun and engaging in motivating students to learn. This is something that there's a philosopher that talks about. This happens to us all the time. If you have a credit card and it has points, you will do almost anything to use that card to get points, and that's gamifying economics. If you have frequent flyer miles on an airplane, if you fly in an airplane, it's what they're calling a game layer over the world. It's a way to motivate people's behavior using game theory. And so we can use this in classrooms as well. If you offer students points, if anyone's ever taught in a classroom, you know that if you offer one extra credit point, students will do almost anything to get one extra credit point out of 4,000 in the class or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's very motivating. So this is ideas that are trickling into college now, especially with online learning. Because if you have to be self-motivated to go online and take the class and show up every day and work on your computer or work online, you need things that make it motivating. And when you have levels and accomplishments and badges and achievements, it's naturally motivating for a student to want to go online and do that. So gamification is particularly important in the online environment. The next slide is just a picture. Actually, I developed a game teaching the nitrogen cycle, and I was here, I was in Pune last January and brought it to 50 college biology teachers. And we did a workshop on active learning and changing biology education. And so this is an actual physical game. And my point, and we've done some studies and research with this, is that just because it's a game doesn't mean it's trivial. These were biology teachers, biology professors who were very, very engaged in this game. My students were studying them, and they learned complex thinking, critical thinking, trade-offs, almost economics of complex cycle around the nitrogen cycle. And they love it, and they come back for more, and they want to keep learning. And this is very different for me as a soil scientist to have a student say, I love the nitrogen cycle, it was fun. That's a huge success. That doesn't happen very often. So that was just a picture in there that just because we say gamified or game, it does not mean it's trivial. It means that if we really want learning to happen, we need to engage the students where they are first, and then ask them to do more complicated academic things. Go ahead. So just a brief note on distance and online education. I thought a lot about what are good models, because you just heard actually Joanna say she had her experience with online and it was not necessarily well done. And it wasn't necessarily socially interactive or anything like that. So when we think about good models for online or distance education, they have to be practical and they have to be engaging. So first of all, the practical, they've got to be easy to use and stable and reliable. I was just at a conference call the other night where somebody set up a loop and it echoed and echoed and echoed and it destroyed the entire call, and 40 people all had to hang up and we gave up. We probably all had similar experiences with technology failing us, and it drives us crazy. So it needs to be easy, it needs to be stable and reliable. It's got to be accessible. These are all these things people are talking about with online learning right now. You've got to be able to assess it securely. So if you give an exam, you have to know that the student out there taking the exam is the one taking the class. It's very easy to cheat online. I happen to think that formal assessment may or may not be all that necessary. Ultimately, the learning that takes place is to have the student be functional in a job and in a career, and that assessment by taking an exam is not necessarily all that useful, but that's a whole other talk. Obviously, it needs to be economically feasible. You have to have low cost, implement it and sustain it, and or it needs to generate revenue in some way through tuition or fees or certification, and that's other things that the online world is looking at very seriously right now. The other thing that's a big issue is it's got to be a recognizable credential. What is it the student gets after completing the online class? This is a little bit different than the informal education that is taking place in other venues. But is it a quality product? If I'm going to accept that a student has taken an online class and they learned something, I need to be able to trust that the site they went to and the class they took was valuable. And then finally, it's got to be scalable, right? There's so many students that need to learn that we need to be able to scale it up. And I wrote MOOCs, and I have a note about that, massively open online courses that are on the rise. And I'll make a note in a second. Next slide. It's got to be engaging. So we've got to give them relevant material. It's got to be applied. We have to give them the right amount. We heard yesterday the Khan Academy mentioned that's a good example of relevant material, a little bite-sized pieces that any student can use it, and they can use it to supplement what they're learning in the classroom, or just use it to learn to start with. Again, I mentioned the gamification. It's got to be inherently motivating in its pedagogy for an online class to be effective. You've got to have a reason to go back there and do it, especially if you're trying to generate revenue from an online source. And then I think, and this really struck me yesterday, you're basically utilizing the principles of the best practices of extension that we heard yesterday. It's got to be customizable, customized. They're going to pull the information they want, portable, and all of those things. Next slide. So these massively open online courses, the MOOCs. Have people here heard of MOOCs? So it's a new phenomenon that's really started to grow quite a bit. It came out of the desire to have an economy of scale or efficiency of scale when some faculty members at Stanford actually started it, and they invented, these are 3 different ones that are out there right now, and they invented a platform that allows a professor to hold a class with more than 200,000 students in it. Now, a very small percentage of those students actually complete the class, but so you start with 200,000 students and 20,000 of them finish. You've still taught a class to 20,000 students simultaneously. And so these different platforms were designed by people in artificial intelligence technology work, and they thought there's got to be a way to be able to scale up what we offer online, and that's what these platforms do. They're wrestling right now with the practical details of giving exams, credentialing, those kinds of things, and generating revenue. How do they self-sustain? They're very variable in quality right now, but they're gaining a lot of momentum. Coursera, that first one, the University of Florida just joined a consortium of universities offering courses through that platform. And of the 6 that we contracted with, 4 are from the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences and are among the very, very few offered out there in the agricultural sciences. They are really growing, and they are accepting students worldwide. There's a lot of articles, and if anyone's interested, I can point you in that direction from the Chronicle of Higher Education in the United States that talk about students from Tibet and students from all over the world that take these courses, and they're free to the students. And they're starting to collect certificates from completing courses, and then they go to a college and they say, well, I've already done all this work, you must give me credit for it. And that's part of what's going on with these open online courses. But in the end, I think most important of all, the technology really is just, it's a tool. You heard this as well, you can't forget the human interaction. Technology in and of itself is not the end goal. Education is the end goal. We can't get away from the importance of instructors. Our role may be changing, but our skill and our enthusiasm matters tremendously still. We do need to think about how we change our role so that we can be most effective. And then I'll end with just a real quick example of what I mentioned yesterday, the Challenge 2050 project. So you can go next slide. This is where we're trying to look at how do we change the way we think about education by starting with a problem first, and it's called challenge-based learning. And so we put the problem first, and you challenge the students with addressing the ultimate question, which is how are we going to feed more than 9 billion people by 2050? And especially in the United States, students think fairly simplistically, well, easy, we just grow more food. Well, most of them don't have any idea how to grow food in the first place, and they don't recognize that it's not quite so simple as that. It's got to be good food, and it's got to be in the right place. It has to be storable, and all of the various things. And so this problem, it involves not just simply growing more food, which is what our students naively think. It's complex, and it involves food systems, yes, but also social systems, economic systems, environmental systems, and health systems. And so we're designing a curriculum around those 5 systems and asking the students to have a broader understanding of the problem. And at the same time, they're working in teams, and they're being asked to carve out a piece of this challenge. And be responsible at the end of their program for coming up with some kind of solution to it. And so they're supposed to wrestle with it. The world is not cut and dry and neat and simple. It's very complex and very challenging. And so that's the idea, is that they have to look for a solution to this real problem. Then, not only that, but unlike a final exam or a term paper that they write and they get a grade and then no one ever looks at it again, the point that we're holding them accountable for delivering their solution to its intended audience. So I don't care if these are 20-year-old people. What I want is for them to be professionals and to complete a policy recommendation or a white paper or some kind of product that will be delivered to its intended audience. And then hopefully what we end up doing is engaging students, and they are very creative. They're very enthusiastic, and so there's a lot of diversity in thinking and ideas that this leverages. And we're currently developing this. It's launching next fall, and it's an opportunity, I think, for partnerships or exchange where students can benefit from each other's perspectives. So, in summary then, the goal ultimately is we're trying to produce the future, the next generation of leaders, researchers, and professionals in this very changing, complex world. And so they need to be globally aware, adaptive, innovative, and entrepreneurial. That's what I said yesterday. Wherever you are, this is the kind of challenges that you're facing. Even working on a farm, growing on a bigger farm, you've got to have an awareness of how to use some of the knowledge that's out there. And so we need to think about this next generation and what they need. And the challenge that we face then is we're working with an educational culture that's deeply rooted in a way of thinking about knowledge and students and transmission of that knowledge. And we need to try to challenge that and think about how do we do a better job now for the students that we have today and the world that we think we're going to have in the future, and how do we become more flexible and adaptable ourselves in education enterprise. And so with that, I think ultimately it's going to take partnerships and ideas and all kinds of new things to that stuff. And I'm happy to be here to have some of these conversations with you. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Teri. Well, I certainly learned a lot there. It was very inspiring. And I can see a lot of the concepts Teri brought forward being relevant not only to a university, but to our own organisations, where we're all information providers. We want other people to take that up and say, how can we apply that? I'm thinking of how I can apply it to my children as well and give them a problem. How does your room get tidy?
Get a gold star or a silver, gold medal, silver medal, or bronze medal, depending on how tiny it is.
Okay, all right, thank you, Teri.